I wasn't always the kind of woman people notice. In fact, for most of my life, I was the background noise in other people's stories, the extra in the scenes of my own life. My name is Emily, and if there's one thing I remember most from my early 20s, it's the feeling of being invisible. At work, I was just the assistant. At home, I was the disappointment. And in love, well, I was his secret, not his partner, not his choice, just a convenience. I learned early on that silence can scream, that when people ignore your voice long enough, they teach you that it doesn't matter. But they were wrong, so wrong. There's a moment, just before everything breaks, when you can feel it in your bones, like the air changes. That moment came for me on a rainy Tuesday. I was delivering coffee to a boardroom full of men who didn't know my name, including the one I thought loved me. He didn't even look at me. Not once. But he laughed at her joke. The new marketing manager with the tight dress and the fake laugh. That's when something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked. And through that crack, something new began to rise. I didn't cry. I took notes. Because when people show you where they think you belong, that's when you start planning your escape. Or, in my case, your rise. I went home that night drenched in rain and disgust. I stood in front of the mirror and saw someone I didn't recognize. Not because she looked different, but because she was finally looking back. Not down, not away, but straight into her own eyes, with fire. That was the night I started documenting everything. Every slight, every betrayal, every missed promotion, every fake smile. I wasn't planning revenge. I was collecting fuel, and they were handing it to me, one humiliation at a time. I started waking up earlier. Not to impress anyone, those days were over. I woke up for me. I began studying every morning before work, silently upgrading my life while everyone still thought I was just the coffee girl. I read about marketing, strategy, leadership, and not the surface-level stuff. I dove deep. While they laughed in the break room, I was learning how to dominate the boardroom. Every harmless insult became a lesson, every cold shoulder, a redirection. But the hardest part? Pretending I hadn't changed. I had to keep the illusion alive, the obedient assistant, the naive girl in the corner. I had to smile while being left out of meetings I helped prepare. I had to congratulate the new hire who got the promotion I was promised. I had to sit in silence as he, my boyfriend, flirted with her right in front of me, pretending like I was a stranger. And the worst part, I let it happen. Because I knew, one day, they would see me. I wasn't planning revenge in the classic sense. I didn't want to hurt them. I wanted to outgrow them. I wanted my name on the door they thought I could never open. I wanted my voice on the stage they never imagined I'd stand on. But I also wanted them to watch, to feel the sting of every moment they made me feel small, and to know that I had been watching, too. Taking notes, building my own plan in the shadows they so confidently ignored. At night, I would reread my journal, page after page of overlooked brilliance, quiet suffering, and suppressed rage. And somewhere between the pain and the power, I found something sacred, clarity. I wasn't broken. I was becoming. And no one knew. Yet, the turning point came on a Thursday. I remember because it was pizza day in the office, and I wasn't invited. Again, they always forgot to include me in the lunch orders, even though I organized the team calendar. I walked into the break room just in time to see him, my now ex-boyfriend, though he didn't know it yet, feeding her a slice, laughing like I never existed. That was the moment I stopped grieving. That was the moment I started building. That same night, I stayed late and printed every report, every deck, every analysis I had secretly worked on, the ideas he had stolen and presented as his own, the marketing pitch that got him praised. Mine. The client strategy that saved a dying account, also mine. I printed it all, labeled, dated, documented. Not to cause a scene, not yet, but to prepare. Because when the time came, I wouldn't ask for respect. I'd demand it, with proof. At the same time, I was applying, not for jobs, but for opportunities. I pitched my own proposal under a fake name to the same leadership board he was so desperate to impress. I didn't need the title. I needed leverage. And it worked. The board loved it. They scheduled a meeting. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to be in a room where the nobody he discarded would be introduced as the expert they wanted to hire. Karma doesn't knock, it storms in. And yet, I wasn't rushing it. That's the thing about silent revenge. It waits. It sharpens. It chooses the perfect moment to rise. I wanted my story to be undeniable. I wanted to walk into that boardroom not for applause, but to watch their faces drop in disbelief. The day of the meeting felt like the quiet before a storm. I walked into the building early, dressed not for war, but for power. A tailored suit, my hair up, no apologies in sight. When I passed by my old desk, no one even blinked. That's how invisible I had become to them. But soon, they'd see everything. I stepped into the elevator with a calm heart and fire in my eyes. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. The moment the door opened to the executive floor, I saw him, my ex, laughing, loud, cocky, completely unaware. He was bragging about a new pitch he had developed himself, the same one I submitted anonymously. The irony was almost poetic. The receptionist led me into the boardroom, and when the execs walked in, he followed, clipboard in hand. But when they turned and said, "Emily, thank you for joining us," his smirk vanished. Completely. For a second, he didn't speak. Then, like the coward he was, he tried to play it cool, acting surprised to see me, pretending this was some hilarious misunderstanding. But the board knew. They had read my proposal. They knew it wasn't his. They asked me to present, and as I stood there, in heels that didn't shake and a voice that didn't falter, I laid out every detail of the strategy, every angle, every insight, every number he never understood. His silence was deafening. The execs were impressed. I watched their eyes shift, from him to me, and stay there. When the meeting ended, they asked him to step outside, and just like that, I was offered a consulting position. Higher pay, more freedom, 0 apologies. I declined, of course. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because I had bigger plans. This wasn't my final destination. This was just my announcement. 2 days after the boardroom fallout, I got the call. My father had passed away. The man who once told me I was too emotional to lead. The man who never showed up to a single one of my graduations. I flew back home alone, not because no one offered to come, but because I didn't want anyone beside me. Grief is complicated when love was never clear. I stood there at his funeral, surrounded by family who barely remembered I existed. The forgotten daughter, again. But something shifted in me at that gravesite. As I watched them praise him, the man who taught me to stay small, I realized I didn't owe anyone quiet anymore. I walked away from the eulogies and sat by myself under a tree, and I cried. Not for him, but for the little girl who never got to feel seen. That was the last tear I would shed for invisibility. From that day forward, I vowed never to shrink again. When I returned home, I declined more job offers than I could count. People were finally discovering me. They wanted to hear my ideas, the same ones they once ignored. But I didn't want a seat at someone else's table. I wanted to build my own. So I did. I launched a small agency from my apartment, with just a laptop, a vision, and the fire of every time I was underestimated. And guess what? It worked. Clients came, slowly at first, then like a wave. Within a year, I had my first major contract, with the very company that once labeled me as support staff. They didn't even realize who they were hiring at first, until I walked into their office as their lead consultant. And this time, no one forgot to order my lunch. Success has a strange way of making people remember you. Suddenly, the ones who once forgot my name were whispering it in meetings. Have you heard what Emily's doing now? She just signed a $1 million contract. She used to work here, right? It was almost amusing, watching them rewrite history, pretending they saw my potential all along. But I didn't need their validation. I was building something no one could take credit for but me. Still, I kept my distance. I wasn't here for revenge served loud. I wanted something colder, more permanent. Legacy, influence, grace. I hired 2 interns, both women overlooked just like I had been. I made sure they never felt like I did. Small, forgotten, voiceless. I paid them well, mentored them better, and showed them what leadership actually looks like. Quiet power is contagious, and I was spreading it. But then, he reached out. Him, the ex who used my work, ignored my worth, and flirted with my replacement in front of me. He emailed me saying he wanted to grab coffee and reconnect. Said he admired what I'd built. Said he always believed in me. The audacity. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any insult he ever threw at me. And that silence, that was my final word to him. By then, I had outgrown the walls they once boxed me into. I wasn't the assistant. I wasn't the daughter seeking approval. I was the architect of my own rise. And they all had front row seats. It arrived in a gold envelope, thick, expensive, self-important. An invitation to the company's annual gala, the one I was never invited to when I worked there. The same event I once cried over in a bathroom stall while listening to them laugh downstairs. But now, I was being asked to attend, as an honoree. They wanted to celebrate female entrepreneurs who overcame adversity. The irony could have knocked me over, but I didn't laugh. I accepted. I arrived in a black dress that whispered elegance and screamed arrival. Heads turned. Whispers followed. People I used to serve drinks to were now tripping over themselves to offer me champagne. I walked past them with poise, not pride. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there for remembrance of who I was, who they thought I'd remain, and who I chose to become instead. When they called my name on stage, I didn't tremble. I stood tall. I looked out at the crowd and saw familiar faces. Surprised, nervous, maybe even ashamed. And I told them the truth, that I once worked in silence, that I once felt invisible, that every no I was given became a yes I gave myself. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The truth lives in the eyes of the guilty, and I saw plenty of them that night. I ended my speech with a single sentence. To every woman who has ever been overlooked, let them. The applause was long, but the silence after was louder. That silence. That was the sound of realization. That was the sound of power shifting. And I walked off that stage not just as a survivor, but as the storm they never saw coming. A few weeks after the gala, I found a box buried in my closet, filled with old journals, resumes that were never answered, and letters I wrote to people who never cared enough to read them. Among them was one addressed to him, not my ex-boyfriend, but my father. It was the letter I wrote the night he told me I'd never make it on my own. I never sent it. I was too scared, too ashamed, too small. I sat on the floor and read it out loud for the first time. Every word felt like touching an old wound. I'm not broken. I'm just beginning. That was the last line. I remember writing it with trembling hands. Back then, I didn't believe it. But now, I whispered it like a vow. I didn't cry. I closed the box. I didn't need to send the letter anymore. I had lived the answer. Every step I took in silence had become my loudest response. That night, I walked through my apartment, through the space I had built from scratch, and finally felt it settle in my chest. Peace. Not because I had won, but because I had healed. Revenge might have started my journey, but growth became my compass. The applause, the power, the recognition. None of it compared to the quiet pride of knowing I never became like them. I rose. Yes, but I did it without stepping on anyone. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the window, and let the city noise fill the room. Somewhere out there, someone was sitting in silence, thinking they didn't matter. I wanted them to know they do, because I had once been her, and if I could rise from the shadows, anyone can. By now, people had stopped pretending they didn't remember me. My inbox was full. Invitations, collaborations, partnerships, most of them from people who once saw me as too quiet, too emotional, not leadership material. They wanted in, on my name, my company, my vision. And while I welcomed growth, I never forgot who I was when they shut the door. I chose my partnerships carefully. I hired women who had been silenced. I mentored men who were humble enough to learn from a woman. I built a team that didn't just perform. They believed. In themselves. In one another. We didn't talk about inclusion. We lived it. I wasn't just building a business. I was building a world I wished had existed for me. But the most unexpected moment came on a random Tuesday. I was walking out of a cafe when I saw her. The woman my ex left me for. She looked tired, pale, older than she was. We locked eyes for just a second. And in that moment, I didn't feel hate. I felt something stranger. Compassion. Not for her, but for who I used to be. The version of me that thought worth had to be earned through suffering, that believed silence was survival. She looked away first, and I walked away free. Because that's the thing about revenge. The sweetest kind is not when they suffer. It's when you don't have to look back. When you've become so whole, so untouchable, so grounded in your truth, that even their ghosts lose power over you. It's strange how a life can turn. From overlooked assistant to keynote speaker. From heartbroken to whole. From invisible to unforgettable. I stood backstage at a global summit, the same event I once watched online from my tiny apartment, wondering if people like me could ever belong there. And now, my name was on the banner, my story, the headline. They weren't just inviting me to speak. They were listening. As I took the stage, I didn't feel nerves. I felt purpose. I looked out at a sea of faces, women, men, young professionals, old executives, all of them waiting, not for a perfect speech, but for the truth. And I gave it to them. I spoke about silence, about betrayal, about the long nights where no one clapped, no one saw me, no one believed. I told them how I rose, slowly, quietly, unstoppably. And when I finished, I said one last thing. If they ever made you feel small, grow so big they can't look past you again. The room erupted, but the applause wasn't my revenge. My peace was, my legacy, the women I helped rise, the voice I reclaimed, the name they once ignored, now echoing in rooms they can't control. I walked off the stage with no crown. I didn't need one, because I had already claimed something better. My voice, my worth, and my freedom. If you've ever felt invisible like I did, leave a comment below. I read them all. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Someone out there needs this story just like you found it today.